I'm Dave Dinkle, and this is Transactional Funding for Real Estate Investors Question and Answer Series. Our question for today is, what are the requirements of transactional funding? The requirements of transactional funding lenders vary only slightly. In transactional funding transactions, the money loaned to the investor covers the initial purchase of the subject property. This is the so-called first leg of the transaction, or the A to B leg. In this designation, the A entity is the original property seller and the B entity is the investor. The second leg of the transaction is the so-called B to C leg. The C designated buyer is the end buyer who is actually taking possession of the property when the closing is done. In reality, the property can be resold or flipped many times before this C or end buyer is the final owner. In these cases, each of the investor buyers is designated by another letter, C, D, E, F, and so on. The second leg of the transaction has little or nothing to do with the transactional funding except for the money that will be wired out. Transactional funder usually wants to see the HUD-1 closing statements for both legs of the transaction, information about the investor and who is the closing agent for the transaction, as well as having the investor or closing agent sign a letter of understanding. This letter of understanding is a legal document that states the terms that the investor and the closing agent have to fulfill before and after the closing. These requirements usually include that the lender's funds not be used for the A to B leg until all documents have been signed by all parties involved in the transaction and the funds for the end buyer C are cleared and in the closing agent's escrow account. In summary, the transactional funder has minimal requirements that should be easily satisfied by all the parties to the transaction. If any party to the transaction is not willing to wire their funds, sign an agreement about distributing the transactional funds, and the time periods involved when the closing agent can hold the funds, the transactional funder may cancel or withdraw his funding. Thanks for joining us for the Real Estate Investors Series on transactional funding.